This is iPhone 15 Pro Max. And this is iPhone 16 Pro Max. At first, you probably don't notice anything different between these two phones, but when we turn it onto its side, you'll see the extra button, and if you look closely, you'll see that the 16 Pro Max is actually a little bigger. But the 16 Pro Max is a bigger upgrade than you think. Here's why. So, iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. On the surface, they look pretty similar to last year's iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, but when you dig a little deeper, you start to see a few things that are new. For starters, obviously there's a new camera control button, which, yes Apple, is actually a button. The action button also returns this year, and you've got a few other upgrades. Apple Intelligence is coming later this year, although you can get that on the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, but these devices have been specially made for it with their new A18 Pro processor. The cameras get a few bigger upgrades, specifically on the smaller Pro model. And the screen is tougher than ever and can get even darker. If you want to hear more about the new iPhone 16 devices, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's start with the new camera control button, which you can find down here on the bottom right hand side of the device if you're holding it in portrait mode. This has been designed to give you a better control of the camera. You're going to be able to access similar controls as you were before using the display, but this now comes in a button which is particularly handy when you're shooting video in landscape mode. If you press the button once, you'll open the camera app. Press it again, you can take a photo, and if you press and hold it, you record a video. While that's pretty handy itself, it also comes with a touch capacitive sensor, coated in sapphire. What this means is if you lightly press the button and then swipe either up or down or left or right, you can actually control the camera. You can zoom in or out, for example, or you can switch between different photographic styles, change the exposure, and even more. Like I said, this doesn't introduce anything new, but it's a more handy way of controlling the camera. But it does bring with it a brand new feature called Visual Intelligence, although that's not quite here yet. When this launches, you'll be able to point your iPhone at something, press the button, and it will identify what's in front of you, similar to Google Lens if you've ever used that. Basically, I could point my iPhone at a dog, ask Siri what kind of dog it is, and she'll be able to tell me. Or similarly, I could put my iPhone at a poster and Siri will capture all the information from that poster and suggest adding it to my calendar or something similar. If you were using the action button to open up the camera before, it now frees that up for you to map it to something else. And that's right, the action button is back on the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. It's a customizable button that replaces the ringer switch, and you can program it to do whatever you want. It comes with a few predetermined options that you can pick from, such as muting your device, opening the camera, starting a voice memo, etc, etc. You can also use the Shortcuts app to pre-program whatever you'd like in there. For example, I'm using the Arc Search browser, and if I press the action button, it opens up the voice search feature. This basically lets me browse the internet with a voice request when I need a little bit more AI assistance than Siri can handle. Speaking of Siri, the Smart Assistant is getting a big upgrade as part of Apple Intelligence. That's right, Apple Intelligence is on the way to the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. It is also coming to the 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max, but as I mentioned, the A18 Pro chipset has been designed to give you better performance. So, what does Apple Intelligence actually offer for your device? For starters, Siri is getting a big upgrade. Visually, the Smart Assistant is going to look a lot different. The UI for the Smart Assistant now glows around the edge of your display rather than the little button at the bottom. You can also now double tap the home bar at the bottom of your screen to start typing to Siri rather than just using your voice. The Smart Assistant is also getting a lot smarter. If you're mid-conversation and stumble over your words or change your mind, the Smart Assistant's no longer going to get confused by that. She's going to be able to pick up exactly where you left off and carry on with what you asked for. No more, sorry, I didn't get that. You can get help with your devices if you're looking for the manual, and she's also got a wider knowledge base. What this means is she's going to ask to search the web less often than before. Later this year, Siri's going to get contextual awareness, which means she's going to understand more things from your device. For example, she'll be able to keep up to date with your calendar, your emails, and your text messages. For example, if I wanted Siri to open the photo that Jess texted me last week about a dog, she'd be able to do that for me. And if I then wanted to edit this photo, Siri would be able to help me out with that before I have to manually take over. ChatGPT integration is also on the way, which is basically going to plug in the AI chatbot from OpenAI. Siri's only going to send off requests when you explicitly ask her to, and this is going to give you even more AI capabilities. So, what else is new in Apple Intelligence? Aside from Siri getting a big upgrade, one of the biggest features is Cleanup, which actually lives in the Photos app. When you've taken a photo, if there's something in there that you don't like or a person you don't want, you can actually use AI to remove them. This is pretty similar to Google's Magic Eraser. When you open up Cleanup, your iPhone's going to have suggested what you might want to remove already, or you can just circle around or scribble on top of whatever you do want to get out of there. Now, it's not just going to get rid of this from your image, it's actually going to use AI to replace that part of the image entirely, so it's going to look like it was never even there in the first place. Writing tools are also a big part of Apple Intelligence. This is basically a writing assistant powered by AI. For example, you can highlight text you've written and pick from a number of different styles to get it rewritten. If you've typed out a message that's really long, you might want this to be more concise, or perhaps you want something to sound a little bit more professional. This also works the other way. If you're reading something and want it summarized, if you just highlight along the text, Siri will be able to summarize this for you. One of my favorite Apple Intelligence features has got to be notification summaries. Basically, your device is now going to be able to read whatever comes through on your notifications and use AI to give you a summary of this. So if someone sends you a really long text, your iPhone's going to be able to summarize this for you in just one sentence. From my testing so far, I've found that my iPhone typically picks out about 3 key points and writes these down in one sentence. Notification summaries can also work with multiple messages or emails, and they extend to pretty much any app on your device. Finally, Apple Intelligence gives you a reduce interruptions feature. Basically, this uses AI to work out which of your notifications are actually important and then sends them through to your device in a focus mode. So it's going to help to reduce the clutter. There's also the Image Playground and Genmoji, which are coming later this year. Genmoji is going to let you create your own emojis and send these to friends, while the Image Playground is going to let you generate your own images, similar to DALL-E. These are actually coming a lot later this year. Apple Intelligence hasn't arrived in iOS 18, which is what you'll find on your new iPhone 16 Pro or 16 Pro Max out of the box. Instead, it's going to be coming in an update called iOS 18.1. You can expect this around October. However, some features such as Genmoji, Image Playground, and a new Siri are going to be held back until even later this year, or even as far back as February if some rumours are to be believed. Now this is because Apple's not quite finished them up internally yet. But it seems a bit cheeky that Apple's advertising Apple Intelligence as a flagship feature for these new phones, and it's not actually shipping with them just yet. As I mentioned, both devices are bigger. The iPhone 16 Pro is up from 6.1 inches to 6.3 inches, while the 16 Pro Max is up from 6.7 inches to 6.9 inches. While the devices are a few millimeters taller themselves, this is mostly down to smaller bezels. Apple's using some really clever display tech to put more of the display's components behind the screen rather than at the side. The result is a much slimmer bezel. You can particularly notice this if you look from an older iPhone model, any of them will do, but you can still notice them even if you look back at last year's iPhone 15 Pros. That's not the only change to the display. Apple's using a new second gen ceramic shield which is supposed to be 50% tougher and about twice as strong as glass. I'm not prepared to chuck my new iPhone down on the concrete to test this, but you can expect more resilience to scratches, cracks, and other scuffs and marks. And finally, while you notice the displays get just as bright at around 2000 nits, they can actually crank all the way down to just 1 nit. It's using the same tech that powers the always on display, but your iPhone can do this all the time now. It's going to be a godsend for anyone that uses their phone at night. Of course, the always on display returns, as does the other Pro feature of the 120Hz ProMotion display. Let's talk about the camera. The biggest change this year is actually the ultra wide lens. That's been upgraded to 48 megapixels to match the main sensor. You've still got a 12 megapixel telephoto lens, but the 5x optical zoom lens has come down from last year's 15 Pro Max to the smaller iPhone 16 Pro. We won't dive into the nitty-gritty numbers too much, but Apple has actually improved the main sensor as well. This comes through a few smaller upgrades such as focal length. You're going to really notice this if you start to pixel peep on your photos quite a lot. The aperture speeds are also faster, so you'll notice that your iPhone's a bit snappier when you're taking consecutive photos. Also new is DSLR photographic styles. While you used to be able to customize how your iPhone takes photos, you can now pick between predetermined styles and fill around with them just as much as you want. You can do this directly from the camera or in the settings app. Basically, you can tell your iPhone just how you like your photos and it will take them in that format from now on. Here are some photo samples I've taken with the device. I've not played around with the styles too much, so this is what you can expect straight out of the box. Using deep fusion cameras, your iPhone can actually snap photos in 48 megapixels rather than just in 24. However, you will need to switch off the live photos feature for this to work. Let's talk about video. One of the biggest upgrades this year is real-time color grading, which is a must-have if you're a pro. Your iPhone can now shoot in 4K at 120 frames per second, which leads to some excellent slow motion shots just like this one. Plus, you get 2 new AI-powered features which are not part of Apple Intelligence whatsoever. The first is Audio Mix, which now lets you play around with how audio sounds on the videos you've taken. You can basically pick where in the video you want the sound to come from. For example, you can select in frame so that your iPhone only plays the video from what it can actually see. In my testing, I found this isn't actually quite as reliable as you'd think. Look at this sample footage. In theory, if I select the whatever's on the screen mode, whatever's in shot, you should only be able to hear the audio from what phone's looking at. So if I step over here outside of the shot, in theory, you shouldn't be able to hear me anymore. But it does do a great job at editing out the noise of the waves, which is something that cannot be said for the AI-powered noise reduction. Now, Apple says this is supposed to specifically target wind noise, which I think it does a pretty good job at. But it can't quite handle other noises such as the waves or the sea in the background. Probably won't be able to do barking dogs either. So it's a pretty windy day and the sea noise is over there, so this is a great time to check out and see how well the AI wind noise reduction does. You're supposed to be able to hear me, although that noise gets cut out. Let's see what it actually sounds like. Another little camera tidbit is that your iPhone can now take spatial videos and photos. What this means is you can relive your content in 3D when you're wearing an AR or VR headset such as the Apple Vision Pro. A lot of people probably aren't going to ever touch this, but if you do have one of these headsets, it's nice to have. Now, let's talk about where things get really different inside with the A18 Pro chipset. The GPU is 20% faster and the hardware accelerated ray tracing is supposed to be twice as good as last year's 15 Pros. The CPU is going to be about 15% faster than last year, but it's 20% more power efficient. What this means is your device isn't going to get quite as hot and the battery is going to end up lasting a little bit longer. More on battery in a second. To try and give you a better example of how much difference the new A18 processor makes, we're going to do a quick little test. This is the iPhone 16 Pro Max and this is the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Remember that. We're going to take this little laser temperature reader, and on the 16 Pro Max, after recording 4K 60 frame per second video for about 10 or 11 minutes, we're sitting at around 33 degrees Celsius. If we then come over here to the 15 Pro Max, we're sitting at around 36.8. So we're actually looking at around a 3 to 4 degree difference between the two phones. In the same time of recording, the 16 Pro Max used about 2.5% of battery, while this one went down a solid 5 to 6% of battery. They're both sat at around 50% as it was, so it's a pretty fair test. And because the 16 Pros have been built for Apple Intelligence from the ground up, there's a 16-core neural engine. What this means is you can expect about 15% faster performance when it comes to any AI tasks such as cleanup or any of the notification summaries. A lot of this is happening behind the scenes, so you're not going to notice it as you're using your phone, but for the features like cleanup, you'll certainly appreciate this. I promise I'd come back to battery because that's one of the 16 Pro Max's selling points. On my iPhone 15 Pro Max, if I got on a 2.5-hour train ride, use my personal hotspot to do some work on my laptop, listen to some music or maybe a podcast, and then scroll Twitter for a little bit, I'd end up there with about 62% remaining. Doing the same thing with my iPhone 16 Pro Max, I ended up with about 74-75% remaining. This isn't leaps and bounds better, but it is a noticeable improvement, and you're certainly going to appreciate it on those longer days. For context, on my 15 Pro Max, I was getting around 9 to 10 hours of screen on time per day, and on this one I can get all the way up to 11 to 12 hours. This is with real world usage rather than just doing some battery tests in the lab. Of course, I've only had this phone for about a week, and sometimes it takes 2 weeks to break in a new phone's battery, but you can expect these results to be pretty indicative of the new devices. This year's new colour option is Desert Titanium, which is sort of a goldy brown finish on the sides and a whiter back on the rear. I've gone for natural titanium again because that's my favourite, matches my Apple Watch and some other accessories that I've got, but it also comes in white and black titanium as well. Thankfully, the Pros start at 250 gigs of storage and start from $999 for the smaller one and $1099 for the larger one. As I've said throughout this video, the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max are pretty incremental upgrades when you compare them to last year's Pro devices. But if you're coming from an older device, you're going to really appreciate these updates, especially compared to the 15 Pros. If you're using one of the iPhone 15 Pros, you don't need to upgrade unless you really want that extra battery life or the 5x optical zoom lens on the smaller Pro model. I'm going to be making more iPhone 16 Pro content and reviewing the full Apple Intelligence set of features when it comes out rather than just in the beta, so make sure you subscribe to the channel to catch that. As a side note, if you're looking to put a case on your new device, there are a few things you need to be aware of. If you're using a third-party case, you're going to notice a new cutout for the camera control button. Depending on which case you go for depends on how big this cutout is going to be. Some of them I've seen are pretty egregious, while others are pretty manageable. It might also affect just how much you can slide your finger up or down. If you're using one of Apple's own cases, you're going to get a much better experience because they've essentially re-added the camera control button to the case. Speaking of cases, I'm actually giving some away. Smartish sent me a bunch of their cases for the 16.1 iPhone 16 and the 16.9 iPhone 16 Pro Max. If you like this video and leave a comment, I'll be picking a winner randomly in about 7 days or so, and I'll get in touch with you. See you in the next one.